Hello, friends, and welcome to the August 25th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Adnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. And I want to set the stage before we jump in. So we are recording Wednesday afternoon after a flurry of activity this week after quorum was finally reached in the Texas House. We're currently on the 18th day of a 30-day second called special session of the Texas Legislature and expect a ton of news over the course of the next few days to the next week. So last week, we talked about the many bad bills that the Texas Senate had passed and sent over to the House of Representatives, waiting for them to, in theory, reach quorum. So now that they've reached quorum, we're going to talk about how those bills are progressing in the House and some new surprises that we've seen this week. We'll also talk about what Texans of faith should be watching and what you should be communicating with your representatives. So we'll talk about all of that and more with Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Josh Houston, later in the program. But before we welcome Josh to the conversation, we are excited to reintroduce one of my favorite Weekly Witness segments, which is the Weekly Word, which helps us center ourselves and remind Texans of faith why we engage in this important advocacy work. And so here with us today for that conversation is Representative Donna Howard from Austin. And she's one of the Texas representatives who met with national faith advocates in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago. We talked about that with Sister Quincy Howard 2 episodes ago, so you can go back and listen to that conversation to remind yourself what I'm talking about. But Representative Howard, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for the work you're continuously doing on behalf of Texans and Texans of faith and your constituents. But the floor is now yours for this week's Weekly Word.
Okay, thank you so much. And I have to say it was awesome being on that Zoom meeting with Sister Quincy and all the other faith leaders. I'm going to say a little bit about my background, but one of the things that I have been involved with for years, decades actually, was what at one time was Austin Metropolitan Ministries and then Austin Area Interreligious Ministries, and now IACT. But I was active in that organization, on their board. Interfaith, multi-faith work is extremely important in the social justice arena, and we saw that clearly in Washington with those national groups. So I was thrilled to be a part of that. Just real quickly, because I think it is interesting and kind of gives perspective when you know what our background is. And I'm just going to very briefly say, I was fortunate enough here in Austin, I've lived here my whole life, to be reared in University Baptist Church. And it was a loving church, foundational for me, a place where we were encouraged to ask questions and not necessarily think that we were going to get all the answers. The minister that I mainly grew up with was Dr. Blake Smith, one of the first ministers in Austin to integrate. And in fact, our church lost some membership when that happened. And what I distinctly remember Dr. Smith saying was, when they told us our church was dying, that he couldn't think of a better way to die than by being Christian. So fast forward, though, to my adulthood, and I ended up marrying someone whose father was a Unitarian minister. I ended up becoming a part of the Unitarian Universalist Church, which has served me well in my theological journey over the years. And just real quickly, for those that don't know, in the kind of the bumper sticker definition of Unitarian Universalism, which are out of the Judeo-Christian heritage in the 1700s here in the United States, originated, at least in the United States. But as Unitarianism is about belief in one God, and Universalism is about universal salvation. Although I would say that in today's iteration of Unitarian Universalism, it's a broader kind of inclusive group that doesn't have any creed, so invites a lot of different perspectives. Okay, that being said, because we've been talking about elections, I want to just briefly mention that in terms of faith. I have to mention what happened with former Unitarian minister James Reeb, who was killed in Selma. In fact, he was the minister who was killed that propelled Lyndon Johnson to actually move forward with the Voting Rights Act. He was a friend of my father-in-law, who was a Unitarian minister. At that time, my father-in-law was at the Chattanooga church, which was firebombed because of their involvement with civil rights. And then James Reeve, who was a friend, was supposed to be spending the night with him the night that he was killed. There's a real personal connection to what happened there, even though I wasn't directly involved. I feel a real connection to it. And then also my father-in-law was very active with not only the civil rights movement, but the anti-war movement at the time, and was actually jailed after a demonstration at the Capitol. And I'm going to read you what he said after that. He said, "It was quite an experience. I do know it was a good thing for me to have been with the people I have been with, to have shared with them some small measure of deprivation and discomfort for something we believe in, to have been touched by their love and concern. I have no illusions that our actions will cause any sudden change in government policy, but maybe there has been a little change in our hearts, and maybe that is enough." This is we all have our traditions. We all have our involvements with social justice and social action, which is one of the things that I so value about the work of Texas Impact. I've looked at several things that I wanted to be able to say, and I really want to get this to cut to the chase here and get to the end, because I know this is just an opening statement, really. But I think there is an issue for me as to how we bring faith into politics, and what's the balance there. It's not, as I've had someone say here, the choice is not between what we believe to be right and what we believe to be wrong, but between competing rights. And certainly, I think we see that right now in play with COVID and with mask wearing and personal responsibility versus the public good. Certainly, I saw it in Washington with the group of us that denied quorum. And I heard over and over again from Reverend Sherman and Symphonia Thompson and many others who so eloquently captured what was going on, to say, we have been chosen. We are chosen to do this. And though I embrace that, I also understand that my colleagues who stayed at the Capitol, my Republican colleagues, believe that they are being witnesses to God as well. And I find this an interesting dilemma as we try to bring our faith into what we do here, recognizing that they may be competing over what that actually translates to. And I think it's important that we have those discussions and not segregate ourselves from that. And I guess the final thing I'm going to say, just because I'm a Unitarian, and I know that people wonder about what we think and believe in terms of prayer and what we bring to reflecting on how we want to be engaged in this world. And a former Unitarian minister, Forrester Church, wrote about opening up to the mystery. And I'm just going to read a little bit about what he said as my closing statement, and as something to reflect upon. My own forays are usually journeys into meditation or prayer. Losing myself, I find myself, and my perspective is changed. I can describe the experience only as one of mystical union in that which is greater than all of its parts, and yet present in each, in that which gives meaning to all, beyond explanation, beyond knowing or naming. God is not God's name. God is our name for the mystery that looms within and looms beyond the limits of our being. Life force, spirit, ground of being. These two are names for the unnameable that I am now, together with so many other seekers, content to call my God. When I pray to God, the answer comes from within, not to the specifics of my prayer, but in response to my hunger for meaning and peace. God's answer is not a what or a how, not a when or a why, but a yes. Choose life and trust life. Grow in service and love. take nothing for granted, be thankful for the gift, suffer well, dare to risk much, consecrate your world with laughter and with tears, know not what I am or who I am, only that I am with you. This is God's answer to my prayers. So thank you all at Texas Impact for all you do and for everybody bringing their faith and service to the good work that we do on behalf of the people of Texas. So thank you.
Representative, I am certainly thankful for the gift of your time today and thankful for the witness that you and many others have shared over the course of the last few weeks and months and frankly years, and look forward to continuing the conversation throughout the rest of today about how you as listeners, about how we together can work together to support these efforts to work for democracy and a more fair and just Texas. So thank you so much for the time today. Really appreciate you being with us. Right. So next we are excited to welcome to the conversation Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead, and Advocacy Director, Josh Houston. Thank you both for joining. So Josh, we're going to start with you. So the last couple of weeks when we've been talking about the word quorum, which I think I've said more in the last month than maybe the last 10 years combined. But that's because we went so long without one, and then we had one, and then thought that maybe we didn't actually have one, and then maybe we had one, maybe we didn't. So what happened with the quorum, and where are we now?
Well, we have, if you do the math, the Texas Constitution requires 2/3 of all the members to be present. And so there's 150 in the House. That means your magic number is 100. We had one go to Congress and one resign. So the magic number is now 99. That basically means they needed 14 to return, 14 Democrats to return. There were 82 Republicans in the House. You can do the math on, I think I messed up the math on that, but the proper number returned, let's just say that, exactly the proper number returned. There were some questions about whether there were some questionable parliamentary interpretations of the rules, and there was a question about whether there were actually 99 people on the House floor that particular day, but nobody called the point of order to verify that attendance. So it was assumed that a quorum was present, and they then referred bills to committee and began to move. The House, as a result, is very fractured. I don't know of a time where we've ever seen it this fractured. And we're going to get a pretty good look at it tomorrow when they meet for the first time to actually do substantial business on legislation. And we will see a lot of that. We've already seen a lot of testy exchanges just in the last 48 hours, the 2 days of committee hearings that we've had. We've already seen quite a bit of personal animosity between the members. If you want to know that list of Democrats that returned, I have it on my Twitter. I have tweeted it. It's just a floor sheet of the vote that you can look at and see where your member is at on that. But it's relevant to policy for this reason. The purpose of the quorum break was to prevent Senate Bill 1. And Senate Bill 1 is what we are going to be hearing tomorrow. It is calendared for the floor for tomorrow. Just about every policy decision, any bill they can do, the proper remedy with the voters for things that the voters don't like is the ballot box. But when you cannot access the ballot box, that is so fundamental to democracy that is the underlying justification for the quorum break. I'm going to get a little arcane, but it's super important what's about to happen tomorrow. Senate Bill 1 is the big omnibus election bill. It is virtually certain that it will go to a conference committee. That's a committee that then 5 of the House, 5 of the Senate get together and reconcile the differences between the two chambers. It's virtually certain because the current version coming out of Senate bills over in the House, they heard it in the House. The House substituted House Bill 3, their version, which is substantially different than Senate Bill 1, into Senate Bill 1. Therefore, it's going to be 2 different things going to conference committee. That's going to become super important because you could think, well, they could just break quorum before conference committee. But you should also pay attention to tomorrow's calendar for Senate Bill 13. Senate Bill 13 changes the date of the primaries. And this is super critical. They've not done redistricting. Once they know the districts, they want to start raising money. Once they start raising money, there's a legal filing deadline that happens in December for the March primary, which means the amount of time needed to maintain a quorum break is relatively short. You would stay gone until, well, I guess you could have to stay gone until December, but more realistically, because of those deadlines, knowing the districts and all that, you would really have to get it done by about November. I'm basing this on the bill, but the bill says by November 15th before you start needing to change the deadlines. Forgive me. All that is to say, what Senate Bill 13 does is if we have not done redistricting by this date, then this is the primary date. And there's a couple of contingency scenarios where they keep pushing the dates back. This is super important because what it allows the governor to do is to call multiple special sessions before you ever start getting to those deadlines where you have to do redistricting, where you have to have a filing deadline, where you have to have a primary. It pushes all those things back by several months. And so that really takes the Democrats' ability to walk again on Senate Bill 1 kind of off the table. Because they cannot stay gone in perpetuity, but they probably could stay gone for a number of months if they were really had a mind to. And so watch Senate Bill 13. Another important factor about Senate Bill 13 is to note where it's at on the calendar for tomorrow. It's at the bottom. Senate Bill 1 is at the top. You have to go in the order it's on the calendar. So the other thing that this is doing, this construction is constructed this way. You have to think intentionally. I don't. No one has told me, Josh, this is why I did it. But anybody who watches the process can know with virtual certainty. The reason they did this was because there are a number of Republicans, a faction of Republicans, in a very punitive mood. And the speaker is trying to keep that from happening, so they put Senate Bill 13 down here so that Senate Bill 1 is out of the House and off to the Senate. The reason to do that is because if the bill got super bad and the speaker lost control of it, the Democrats could walk again. So watch what happens on the floor tomorrow. Most likely, this construction could hold, but you never know. This construction might not hold. And if some number of Republicans feel like they are in a mood to vacate the chair or embarrass the speaker, or who knows exactly what their agenda is. But if the hardline Republicans get into a punitive mood and start amending the bill in nefarious ways, you could see a new crisis explode on the floor tomorrow. So that's kind of where we're at with quorum. We have it at the moment. We might not have it at any moment, but there is a bill tomorrow that increases the likelihood quite substantially that they'll be able to maintain it after tomorrow when Senate Bill 13 is unlikely to go through a conference committee and is likely to be signed by the governor before Senate Bill 1 makes it through a conference committee.
So again, I mentioned in the open, we're recording on Wednesday afternoon. So when we talk about tomorrow, that's Thursday. And so we'll certainly be watching. We hope you'll be watching. But I also said in the open that the last couple of days, bills have been moving in a hurry. And so the entire Texas Impact team has been watching committee meetings over the course of the last few days, including, spending all night watching terrible things happen overnight. I don't know why it is, but it seems like the overnight hours are when things always get crazy. But there have been a lot of things that have been moving over the course of the last few days. Why don't you bring us up to speed? So last week, when we talked, you went through a list of about 15 bills, I think, that the Senate had passed that they'd sent over to the House and were waiting to see if there was a quorum. As you mentioned, there's now a quorum, and so they're starting to work through that process. So we have an action alert. You can follow along with Josh if you go to texasimpact.org, click on the Action Center, and he's going to walk through some of the bills that we're watching that have moved. But help us understand what's happened over the course of the last few days and what we should be paying attention to.
Yeah. So when we last talked last week, we had seen the Senate's agenda. The Senate had moved. They moved first. They moved roughly 15 bills when you count the SJRs. The Senate had played, at least partially. They have played, and we could at least see what the agenda was. Of course, the Senate is only one of three major players, the other two being the governor and the speaker and the House chamber as a body. And I'm super glad we waited 48 hours to do Weekly Witness because more of the pieces have been revealed, I guess is the way to say. More of the agenda has been revealed, and it has gotten substantially worse than even when we would have said 48 hours ago. So I don't want to bury the lead. That's where we're going with what I'm about to present. We talked about Senate Bill 1. We've talked about Senate Bill 13. Those are the two election-related bills, the big voter suppression piece and then the primary date piece. Also yesterday, on Tuesday, there was, I think at 6 a.m. this morning, it wrapped up, right, Scott? I know you were up for that.
Yeah,
yeah, this is the big anti-trans bill that restricts the ability of trans kids to play sports in our schools. We also heard Senate Bill, well, they actually did not hear Senate Bill 3. Senate Bill 3 is the critical race theory bill, and there's actually two of those, a Senate and a House companion. They had scheduled Senate Bill 3 and House Bill 28 and made the decision in committee to hold up the Senate bill and hear the House bill instead. So House Bill 28 was heard in committee for most of the day, a good part of the day yesterday. This, of course, is micromanaging how teachers talk about race in the classroom. It was left pending. Senate Bill 2 was also left pending. The trans bill was left pending. The race bill was left pending. This is interesting. Don't know what it means. Could just be they were tired and didn't want to do the committee report. But usually if they were all there and could have voted it out, they would have. So who knows? Every day when a bad thing you don't want to have pass doesn't pass, it's a good day. Of course, on the agenda that we don't have a position on is Senate Bill 4, which is an abortion bill, Senate Bill 5, a social media bill. We should note that over the weekend, you mentioned they were moving really fast. Over the weekend and on Monday, they passed out the bail bills. This is redoing how we do bail in criminal cases. This is Senate Bill 6 and SJR 3. These two are related pieces of legislation requiring a constitutional amendment that have to do with how we set bail and for what amounts in criminal cases. Those are already off to calendars, so we will be hearing about those on the floor probably Friday or Saturday. I think the only thing that most of the members agree on is they all want to go home, and they're moving pretty quick. Whether that plays out or not, we will see. You also have Senate Bill 7. This is the 13th check for retired school teachers. It is sitting in the calendars committee as we speak. You have the property tax bills, Senate Bill 8, Senate Bill 12, and SJR 2. These are all set on the House calendar between the election bill and the primary date bill. So between those two things, they'll be talking about property taxes. Those are on the House calendar for tomorrow. You have Senate Bill 9. This is the child abuse prevention bill that the governor vetoed because it did, in his words, did not have a parental opt-out. Of course, that parental opt-out is a great big loophole because if you're trying to prevent child abuse, it's often the family doing it. So we're going to ask, in many cases, be asking the abuser to say, hey, do you want your family trained on what you're doing wrong? So that's a big problem. You have Senate Bill 13, which we talked about. I should mention Senate Bill 9. That bill is still pending in the House Public Education Committee as well. We've talked about Senate Bill 13 on the floor tomorrow. And then you have an interesting thing happening with Senate Bill 14. This is the preemption bill that preempts local governments from being able to protect workers through either mandates on sick leave or water breaks for construction workers. It has been scheduled for 2 different formal hearings in state affairs, and both formal hearings have been canceled. That bill still sits in state affairs, and it's unclear what's happening with it. And then as far as bills go, the final bill, virtual schools, is Senate Bill 15. This would fund full-time virtual learning programs in the public education system. This bill was voted out of public education last night. So there were 4 bills, 3 of them are pending, but this one was voted out last night and has already made it to the calendars committee. So the reports are moving quite quickly too. Which brings me to the big reveal, I guess is the way to say it. Appropriations, money. It's always about money, right? There are several big appropriations bills that we need to talk about because this is the space to watch. It is quite possible, our read on the situation is that it was a real big, that they used, well, we'll get to this, but that they used the critical race theory and the trans bill to really distract from what was going on in appropriations with the money. So let's walk through the picture of what's going on with the money. We obviously know about funding for the legislative branch. That was line item vetoed by the governor. It was used by the governor as it was attempted to be used, constructed as a weapon to force the legislature to act. You will note that they just did a budget execution and went ahead and funded the legislative branch for a month anyway. You'll note that September 1 is in a couple of days. And they found a way to fund it, even though it was vetoed, which you could think if they did it once, they could do it again, right? Nevertheless, that's House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 10. And I want to talk about where we're at in the process with these because it's very important. The bill is simple. It's restoring money for the legislature. Senate Bill 10 is one of the exceptions to the rule. Senate Bill 10 is not sitting over in the House. Senate Bill 10 is still sitting in the Senate Finance Committee. And a reasoned observer would say, well, that's interesting. Why is that? Why is it the lieutenant governor has not chosen to move Senate Bill 10 and has sitting on it? And that would lead a reasoned observer to believe it's a hostage situation. The lieutenant governor wants certain things and is holding that bill up until he gets those certain things. Meanwhile, over in the House, House Bill 1 was already on its way to calendars and is likely to be on the floor and passed pretty quickly. This brings me to a second set of bills, the supplemental appropriations bill. This is Senate Bill 11 and House Bill 5. They are companions at this time, at least. That could change, but right now they are identical. They would make, it is what it sounds like, supplemental, so extra money for several agencies, including Child Protective Services. Senate Bill 11 is also held up in the Senate Finance Committee, part of that potential hostage situation. And House Bill 5 has been passed out of House appropriations and sent to calendars already. So it is also moving in the House and stuck in the Senate. And then there is one bill that is not like the others. There is no companion for it in the Senate. It is House Bill 9. It is money, and a lot of money, for border security. And this is the one where we talked about it, I believe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the "oh, look, a baby wolf" situation, where they were hearing the anti-LGBT bills and the race bills in one committee. Everyone's attention's over here. Meanwhile, they're looking at permanently tripling the amount of money going to border security, appropriating money for a border fence, and reopening 2 previously decommissioned prisons as private prisons. And I'm going to turn it over to Bea because she was the one watching that hearing while Scott and I were watching public education.
Yeah, and so as you said, Josh and I were planning on doing a Weekly Witness episode today until Bea and Sid started blowing up our phones with text messages yesterday about what was happening in appropriations. And so this is the new information. I feel like everything that Josh has talked about so far, like we've covered on Weekly Witness at some point. But as Josh mentioned, this is new. So Bea, help us understand what was happening on House Bill 9 and appropriations yesterday.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to kind of put a line under is, yeah, it's new. I mean, most of the things that we're talking about in this session were not only were they also on the table in the first special session, they were on the table during the regular session. They're things that one way or another somebody didn't get their way over, or in the case of the ones that the governor vetoed, somebody got their way and then they got vetoed and now they're back on it. And in many cases, they are bills that were on the menu in 2019 or even before, right? Like, there's no surprise that we're talking about how we handle trans children, people being fussed about social media, even the races, the CRT stuff and the accusations of racism back and forth. And this is all old news in some ways. Newer news is the evolving strategy of using the governor's power to declare a disaster as a way to make unilateral policy decisions. So what the governor's been doing is using the opportunity of declaring a disaster around different circumstances, and then making policies that are related to the governor's powers, the executive powers during a disaster. And we're seeing that kind of coming up against what Josh said, really a lot of state funding in a policy area that is not by any means agreed on. So what happened was the governor in June, so after the legislature had gone, after the budget had already been made, the legislature had already been light on vetoed, the governor declared a disaster and sort of invited counties to join him in this disaster declaration. And what the disaster is in this declaration is the crisis at the border. And so the crisis was, in this narrative, was precipitated by the Biden administration opening up asylum processes at the border so that more people were coming across. We know it's true. The border is seeing, big uptick in people coming across. There are problems for sure. It's also the case at any time anyone could have said that there were multiple disasters ongoing along the border because the whole region has been so systematically underfunded for so long. People don't have health insurance. There are infrastructure problems. The fracking and other industries have exacerbated those. So there's not a shortage of problems in the border area. But what the governor did was to declare a disaster and then use that disaster declaration as the justification for a budget execution. So when Josh was talking about the way that they said that that the legislature was going to go ahead and get funded for September, they just decided to do that. The way that works is the Legislative Budget Board, which is the lieutenant governor, the governor, and the speaker, and then some appointees from each of the two chambers. And they're generally appointees with characteristics. Like they are the chairman of the Senate Finance and House Appropriations Committee, for example. That small group has the authority, and probably not since forever, but certainly as long as I know of, has been able to meet when the legislature's not in session and move money around, right? Basically do the function that you do when you get on your app on your phone and transfer money from one bank account to another because you just realized that you needed to cover a thing, right? And that didn't change your whole household budget. You know that you're going to have to go back and address that at some point, but right this second, we need to take care of a thing. Well, usually that thing is something that couldn't have been avoided and couldn't have been anticipated. So if there's a disaster, for example, you can't anticipate that the things the state needs to do to restore infrastructure to meet human needs. If there's an uptick in the rolls on the public benefit programs, for example, it wasn't necessarily a way we could have anticipated that. Maybe there was a downturn in the economy, more people go on Medicaid, the state needs to cover them. So we're just gonna have to come back and fix it later. And so the legislature budget executes that money. The legislative budget board budget executes that money. That's what it's called. Budget executes. And that's a common practice. Most people don't think that it's going on very often. And sometimes it's an opportunity to take advantage of a really good thing. You know, there's a special opportunity to get federal funds or something like that. Well, in this case, the governor did this disaster declaration, and the legislative budget board budget executed $250 million. What that means is they took it from somewhere that it had already been appropriated to. So the legislature had decided that $250 million was going to go to a particular purpose. And the small group of people said, well, right now we're just not doing that. We'll figure it out later, but right now we're taking it. Where they took it from was the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And what they put it into was essentially a down payment on the process of border security, securing the border, or what Texas Impact would probably more likely refer to as border militarization. So what House Bill 9 does, it's a supplemental appropriation. And the first piece of it is to appropriate that money that was taken from TDCJ and put it back into TDCJ, because we wouldn't want the Criminal Justice Department just to be out $250 million. But the entire bill, just House Bill 9, is more closer to $2 billion, $1 billion a year for 2 years, and envisions $750 million worth of construction of barriers along the border, which members of the legislature who were in the hearing yesterday described as probably something like a chain link fence, so not necessarily permanent barriers. Paying for the Texas National Guard to really ramp up its presence on the border. The number of personnel that is anticipated in House Bill 9 is 2,500 personnel. And one of the members of the committee suggested that probably wasn't enough and they should look at 5,000, which is, I think, kind of the whole capacity of the National Guard that they could put there. And then, of course, so that would pay National Guard stipends, also would pay for housing for them and supplies, materials, things like that. It would pay for personnel of different types, judicial, lawyers, law enforcement, all aimed at dealing with a situation that I'll describe in a second, which is kind of the thing the bill creates, is the opportunity to do this move. And then it includes a little tiny bit of money out of the $2 billion, $100 million of it, which is not a tiny bit. I understand. I mean, At my house, $100 million would go quite a ways too. But it would appropriate $100 million out of this $2 billion to the counties along the border, to the county judges, to the county administration, to do things that they think they need to do, and including paying them back for costs they've incurred associated with border security. So much of this strategy hinges on the way that migrants who come undocumented are treated right when they get across the border. So for quite a while, I mean, I think the Trump administration talked about this quite a bit, and I think we've talked about it before even that administration. But there's often a question that comes up with undocumented migrants about what exactly crime are they committing? Any sort of crime? They're committing a civil offense by coming the wrong way, but are they doing anything that's criminal? And the answer historically has been no. It's not really a criminal thing; it's a civil thing, right? But recently, the move has been to charge them with criminal trespass, which makes them then be committing not just a civil offense, but a crime. And criminal trespass can be not very serious crime, but still a crime, or it can be a more serious crime. And it can be a more serious crime under certain circumstances, one of which is if it happens in an area where a disaster has been declared. And if a disaster has been declared, then criminal trespass can be a more serious crime. It can, in fact, be a felony. And if somebody is a felon, if they've been convicted of a felony, or even if they have been charged with a felony, that information becomes part of their record, so that if they were to apply for citizenship in the United States at some future time, their citizenship application would be impacted by the fact that they were accused of a felony. So what we have is an opportunity to, let me say this, let me start. I don't want to impugn anyone's motives. I don't want to suggest that this whole thing is an elaborate construct with just one outcome in mind, and it has to do with hurting migrants from, developing countries who are fleeing for a better life or anything like that. I don't think that it's that sort of well thought through. But the outcome, as it was discussed in this hearing yesterday, looks like this: that a person comes without papers into the United States. They are probably on private land, because most of the land along the border is privately owned. So a landowner complains. They say that this person is trespassing. Because that county is the subject of a disaster declaration, that criminal trespass that they've been accused of is a worse crime than if there weren't a disaster declared. The person has to be incarcerated. They have to be held because they've been accused of this crime. They're held in a county jail where the county doesn't really have the money to pay to incarcerate them. And part of the reason for that is that the county may have a contract with a private prison administrator where the price of incarcerating that foreign national is higher. And then the county is going to have to go through the process of prosecuting that person. And at the end of the day, that person's less likely to be able to become a U.S. citizen, even if they had an asylum claim, and they really should have just gone straight into the asylum system, and they would have been found to be that their claim had merit. So the whole thing is this kind of pernicious construct that maybe there are reasons that some of it is good policy. Maybe it's things that we should do. But nobody heard of it before until the end of June, when the governor did this disaster declaration. And nobody really was talking about it until the appropriations hearing yesterday. And that bill is planning to become law here in the next 2 weeks. So I do think it's fair to say all the issues that we care about, all the things that are on that list of bills that we don't like, we haven't liked, we didn't like them it was sort of like green eggs and ham, right? We didn't like them in 2019. We didn't like them in January. We didn't like them in June. We don't like them now. But we haven't even settled that set of things. And now here come new fresh problems. It really does seem like, Texas Impact is not in the position of telling legislators how they should comport themselves. Breaking quorum, not breaking quorum. Legislators have to maintain their own relationships. But this is a train that is off the tracks, and every car is going off. Someone has to stop the process, and everyone has to be able to start having some conversations again. There has to be some talking before another special session.
So I know we've talked about this, but so our listeners are up to speed. And I have thunder in the background, which is strange because when I came in a few minutes ago, there were blue skies and it was 100 degrees. We just spent an entire legislative session where we had an action alert every week, and there are things in green that we support and there are things in red that we oppose. And listeners will know to go to texasimpact.org in the Action Center and click on the August 25th action alert and make those telephone calls. You've done it 100 times, right? And thank you for continuing to do that. But what's the message, particularly on this House Bill 9, because of the fact we haven't talked about it and legislators might not have even thought about it? What are we asking them to do there? What's the message?
Well, as far as I can remember, as far back as I can remember, we've never opposed a supplemental bill before. Opposing a supplemental bill is like saying, I think you should just eat that. I think you should, somebody's just not ever going to be made whole. We're opposing the bill, and we're opposing the bill because the whole premise is flawed. The LBB shouldn't have budget executed that money. That's not just oops, that was a thing we didn't think of. That was a brand new policy using somebody else's money. And it's not as though TDCJ was so overfunded that it was easy to figure out. Maybe, we should think about what TDCJ could do with $250,000, $250 million. You can probably do something with 250,000, certainly 250 million. I had a sad thing happen during the regular session. There was a bill that Texas Impact felt real strongly about, and it came to the floor, and there was an amendment that we supported, and a legislator that we would normally consider to be pretty stalwart Texas Impact ally. We don't usually ever have to tell that person, hey, we're concerned that you wouldn't see it our way. They usually do. And that person voted in a way that was surprising to me. And so I I communicated with the legislator themselves, and I said, hey, that was the thing we cared about. And they said, geez, nobody said anything to me. And it was something that I hadn't had enough time to think about. And I just went with what the guy next to me was doing, because I usually trust that guy. There's no, it's not okay at this stage of the game to take anyone or anything for granted. I think it would be smart to call every member of the legislature and say, you may not have had a chance to go over this kind of complex web of information about House Bill 9, but we're building an architecture in House Bill 9 for Texas militarizing the Texas-Mexico border at an unprecedented level in a perpetual way. So it's building an architecture for there to be a constant military, not just border patrol, a military presence on the border. At the same time, we are systematically never funding the counties on the border to do the things that they really need to do for their own population. I mean, it's just sort of there's just no end to the irony and tragedy, I guess. But so I think my first thing for anyone would be, regardless of who your member is and what you think you might know about them, what you think their position would be likely to be, call them up and say, have you read the bill? Have you read what it's planning to do? This is not something the legislature should be rubber stamping in the kind of, because what we're really concerned about is these other bills. Josh said the thing about look a baby wolf. That's what my husband said to my kids when they were little. If they had something he wanted to eat off their plate, he would point over their shoulder and say, look a baby wolf. And when they turned their head, he'd take their dinner. So it makes my husband sound bad, but it's the truth. That's what's happening, legislature. Somebody's taking your dinner. They are saying, look over there at the theatrical display about these terrible, emotionally charged bills. While you're looking over there, somebody's picking your pocket.
Yeah, and I'll give both of you a chance to kind of offer a closing thought if you have one. But the other thing that brings to mind, I'll share a quick story as well. I had a person in my Sunday school class. We were in a Zoom meeting a couple of days ago. I hope they're not listening. Well, I guess I hope they are, and we'll just call them out and we'll have a conversation about that. But had a conversation this last week where I said something about the Texas Legislature and kind of what I consider to be the awful things that were happening over the course of the previous couple of days. And they said, "Oh, is the legislature in right now? I thought they were on August recess." I was like, well, number one, like that's Congress that's on August recess. And number two, yes, the Texas legislature is in and kind of doing some awful things, and you should be paying attention. And so, and your friends should be too, right? And so if you're listening, almost an hour into this episode, my hope is that like you care enough to be talking to your friends in your Sunday school classes and your small groups and your social media networks, because people need to be paying attention to what's happening right now. There's some stuff that could really, shape the future of Texas democracy in many ways. And so we hope you'll make the telephone calls. We hope you'll do the things on social media, but we really hope that you'll make sure that your friends are paying attention to what's happening right now, because we're going to be talking about it for the next year and a half. So any closing thoughts from either of you two before we call it a day today?
Josh, you got anything?
Not really now.
I realized that everything that I have said in the past hour sounded just absolutely apocalyptic and potentially paranoid. The one thing the legislature is for sure responsible for is money. the one bill they have to pass is a budget. That's where the bucks, I'm going to say no bucks, no Buck Rogers, right? The bucks stop with the bucks. The money is the punchline every time. And all of the things that we're concerned about are bills that someone can pass and someone can undo the next year, right? The critical race theory bill, the trans bill, these are really important bills. They are bills that can be undone once we start building infrastructure and spending money to put systems in place. It's much harder to undo those things. They develop a life of their own. So yes, people should keep calling about all the bills on the list. There's no reason for the special session. There's no reason for the whole agenda. It is not reflective of the level of discourse the state of Texas should be having. But don't let the punchline of the whole thing be, and also we permanently altered the state budget to militarize the border.
Bea, Josh, thank you both so much for joining us this week for Weekly Witness. And friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to watch this space, keep an eye on texasimpact.org for more information, and join our rapid response team and legislative engagement groups for opportunities to respond to the Texas Legislature and connect with other advocates in your community. But for now, check out the action alert at texasimpact.org in the Action Center and let your friends, congregations, and representatives know that you are working for justice, and hope that they will be doing the same. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly at scott@texasimpact.org. And finally, please remember that if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, make sure that you and your congregations are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, as we mentioned, there is a lot going on in the world, but we hope that you will find ways to engage with the Texas Legislature during this historic time. Let's all do our part to mobilize our friends, congregations, and networks. Now's the time, so let's get to work.